Who can take a flower, roll it up and make it fine? Sprinkle it with knowledge and a little bit of time. Cover it with headlines and a sweet euphoria too. Cannabis man, cannabis man, cannabis man. Spreading news and joy across the land. Diving deep into the growing green. Cannabis man, we're all king.
Hello, and welcome into another episode of the Cannabis Man podcast. Thank you so much for clicking on the show. I am your host, Don Kleppen, and if it's your first time here, welcome. Really appreciate you checking it out. It's a show where we're taking a look at legal cannabis around the United States. I'm here in Chicago, Illinois, which legalized back in 2020, and I've been paying attention closely since the first states legalized back in 2014, those being Colorado and Washington here in the U.S., and I've been a personal cannabis user since around 2007, 2008, which for me was just after high school. I was about 18, 19 when my friends introduced me to it. And then I've been a broadcast journalist since around 2011. I first got into radio here in Chicago, producing shows and, screening calls and working my way up at different radio stations around here. And now you can hear me on the air anchoring news for WGN, 720 AM, as well as some other stations. I've been around the town and I've been doing this work for some time. And I've been fortunate enough to run podcasts for hosts in this town, and I've been a part of many of them. And then after cannabis was legalized here in Illinois, I was really excited for the conversations to start changing to the ones that I have had with various friends and other stoners on this journey since I started using the plant, for things like helping me get to sleep at night, just to socialize and, deal with stress or any other sort of negative quality of life issues that we turn to substances for. And those conversations never really materialized in the mainstream media, in the legacy stations like the one that I work at now and the others that I've worked at before, whether radio or TV. It seems like the stigma around cannabis from last century's propaganda is still much stronger in the minds of not just Americans, but everybody around the world. It was a strong and effective prohibition, which still exists today. And so I guess this podcast is really my effort to do my small part to kill that stigma and bring these insightful, hopefully, and at least informative conversations to you so that you can make your own decisions around cannabis. I say on the show all the time that I don't believe cannabis is right for everybody. That's not what I'm here preaching, but it is right for me, and there's a lot of people out there that feel the same way, and I think we should be afforded the same freedoms of normalized use of cannabis that everyone else gets when using alcohol, caffeine, sugars, or the, long list of pharmaceuticals that we're all prescribed here in the West whenever we have something wrong with us by the healthcare system. So that's kind of what drove me to starting this podcast, and it has been a heck of a journey. We're getting close to 3 years here since the show's been going, and it's really grown since I started. This show has been voted the #1 cannabis podcast, at least the independent cannabis podcast by Good Pods, as well as top 5 in Society and Culture and Indie News. So I'm very thankful for that. And you're listening to a show right now which is being heard in 85 countries around the world, which still gives me goosebumps to say. I really can't thank you enough. I've got listeners in Germany. I've got listeners in Austria. I've got listeners in Australia. Every continent except for Antarctica, which, I don't fault the penguins and the polar bears for not checking out podcasts yet. I'm sure it'll reach them eventually. But everybody else, it seems like all other continents in the world are checking this out, and I really can't thank you enough. And of course, here in the U.S., listeners in every one of the 50 states, along with the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, other U.S. land territories are checking this out too. And it's really been my pleasure to bring to you news stories, which is really what I am to do here, cover the ever-changing landscape of legal cannabis and give you some of those stories, the latest news, and give you perspective on that along with interviews with experts in the space, whether those are politicians, elected or appointed leaders who are making the laws in legal cannabis spaces, if they're entrepreneurs, people who have started companies, businesses, or who are creating products or services in the legal cannabis space that you and I get to try now. If they're journalists in the space, other podcasters, love hearing from other people who are kind of covering this as well. And I also love talking with doctors and researchers, people who are doing the kinds of studies that are going to benefit all of us regarding our collective knowledge around the cannabis plant. So if you haven't already, do me a favor, leave a rating or a review for the show. If you're listening on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, wherever you're getting this podcast, there's a function there for you to leave a comment or rate or review the show. And so if you could do that for me, I'd really appreciate it. Make sure to share it with your friends as well. I also, just last month, I'm recording this November 21st, and it's out tomorrow, November 22nd. And last month being October of 2024, there is so much news in this space that I decided to launch a companion newsletter to go along with this podcast, and that is called The Weekly Chronic. And I use that space to write about news stories that don't necessarily make it into the show or give you some more detailed coverage of stories that I do get to hear, but I can't really dive too deeply into. I've also been doing a lot of product reviews here on the show. I hope you've been enjoying those. The Weekly Chronic gives me another opportunity to review some additional cannabis products and bring those to you as well, so that I'm not just crowding this podcast and making it a giant, product review sort of podcast. So if you like what I'm doing here, you can subscribe to the Weekly Chronic. It is linked below for free, and I put out new issues of that every Tuesday morning, and then you get new episodes of the Cannabis Man podcast every week on Fridays. And this week, there is a lot of news to get to. We're heading into holiday time here. Next week is Thanksgiving. Really crazy how quickly this year has flown by. I don't know if you feel that way as I do, but, my wife Gretchen and I, welcomed our daughter Violet earlier this year, and it just feels like the time is moving in such a crazy way. They call it time dilation. It's a lot like if you've ever taken mushrooms. I know you're listening to this, so you've likely smoked cannabis, but I don't know if you've delved into psychedelics, but if you have, there is a frequent experience among mushroom takers called time dilation, where you get time that really slows down for a while and you feel like the seconds are just crawling by, and then it quickly speeds up, and now all of a sudden an hour's gone by and you haven't even moved maybe from the spot, didn't realize that time was going by. That's kind of what parenthood has been like for me. That's been my experience. There's a lot of time dilation, and it's wonderful, but the year has flown by, and it's kind of crazy to think that next week's already Thanksgiving. So there's been a lot of news relating to legal cannabis. Since the election of the next president here in the U.S. Went earlier this month in November, and President-elect Trump has been naming his cabinet members, there's been a lot of, just hand-wringing and sort of looking into the potential future for legal cannabis. We have this DEA administrative hearing next year. It was scheduled for December 2nd. That's still going to happen, but the judge wants some more information about witnesses. So now we're looking at January or February for an actual potential rescheduling. And since that's been going on, people have been looking really closely at the Trump administration, who's incoming, and what their positions might be on cannabis to see how likely this rescheduling is, along with any potentially descheduling, or how likely it is that any other states are going to make cannabis legal over the next 4 years during this administration. And I do have some news relating to that to get to you, as well as some product reviews. I've got the News Joint Wrap, and I do have an expert conversation that I'm going to be bringing to you later in the show. This has to do with cannabis. There are a lot of dispensaries popping up around Illinois and certainly the other states that have legalized it as well, but it also has to do with workers' rights. I'm speaking with a member of the Teamsters Union, and it's because there have been a lot of dispensaries here in Illinois that have decided to unionize. Those workers decided to band together in order to collectively bargain with the companies who own the dispensaries. And this gets at something that I addressed in this week's Weekly Chronic, which is talking about America's collective understanding of what unions can offer. There was a Stanford study that showed people vastly underestimate what benefits unions can kind of bring to a worker's life and their balance of have between their personal lives and work. And that's a lot of what my guest and I talk about in our conversation. I'm speaking with Alex Suarez of, as I said, the Local 777 of the Teamsters Union. So we get into that, as well as why so many dispensaries are deciding to do it and what she has been seeing specifically from those dispensaries before they go union and then afterwards. So we'll get to all of that and more on this episode of the Cannabis Man Podcast. Hit it.
This is Tommy Chong, and you're listening to the Cannabis broadcast.
And there it is, that theme, different from the beginning opening of the show, as you may have noticed. That theme is the original theme that was written and composed by my good friend Yusu Kim, who I have known since high school and a little bit before that, actually. But Yusu is a very talented musician. He performs under the name Good Son, and he put out a single and an album this year, I know that. But the reason I want to send a big congratulations to Yusu and his wife Joanna is because they welcomed their first child earlier this week on Sunday night. It's Colby Evangelista Kim, and the boy is very healthy. His mom, Joanna, is very, very healthy, and they all look so happy and healthy together as a family here as we are just getting into the holiday season. What a wonderful gift for my friends Yusu and Joanna. Congratulations again, you two, and welcome to the world, Colby. Really can't wait to meet you, and you're coming into a great group of people. Congrats to you all. Now, let's jump into some cannabis discussion, and I would like to start off by getting into the news joint wrap. This is a wrap-up of news stories or events and reviews about cannabis in and around Illinois, all curated for you by IllinoisNewsJoint.com. Think of it as the joint you can hit for all your Illinois cannabis news and reviews. And the biggest news this week locally is that there is a new cannabis research institute, and it's from the Discovery Partners Institute, which is part of the University of Illinois system. And this was announced a while back, but now this CRI, this Cannabis Research Institute, is going to be doing a lot of great examinations into, again, the kinds of questions we still have about cannabis. As my friend in Normal, Paul Armentano, likes to say, we know all we need to know about cannabis in terms of its harm potential, which is to say there really isn't very much harm potential for those of us who are fully adult and use it responsibly and use it with somewhat of an education, understanding exactly how best to use it, rather than just walking into a dispensary before ever having tried it before, asking them for the highest percentage of THC product they have, and then just taking it to the dome and walking to your nearest emergency room and freaking out for the next few days. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about those of us who know what we're doing and who use cannabis responsibly. But as much as Paul and I have talked about that, there are still plenty of questions that can be answered about cannabis. There is still much debate on the topic of addiction, for instance. I've brought that up on the show before. Plenty of people get in my, hair about it on social media. I understand why people say it's not addictive, because the dependency factor that you might get as a cannabis user to that substance is vastly different physically than what you might get if you're an opioid user. If you're using something like morphine, if you're using fentanyl, if you're using heroin, or get into the other stuff like alcohol or nicotine, those substances have a vastly stronger physical dependency that can form when you become addicted to those substances. Cannabis is not that. It doesn't physically tie you to the substance as much. However, as I often point out, we as human beings are completely capable of forming a mental dependency on these substances, and it really doesn't even come down to the substance. It's really just about the behavior and our routines. People can become addicted to exercising. People can become addicted to sex. These things are completely addictive. They can be without any foreign substance entering into your body. And so the notion that cannabis is completely non-addictive is foolish. It's foolish. I'm sorry. If you're one of those people that repeats ad nauseum that cannabis is not addictive, what I would say to you is you're not helping the conversation move forward. The example that I like to use for this is, when's the last time you took a tolerance break? So many of my stoner brothers and sisters who are so devoted to this plant use it every day, as I certainly have in the past. They will scream at me until they're blue in the face. Maybe not scream, stoners are usually a little more chill, but they will argue vehemently that cannabis is non-addictive. And then I suggest, hey, maybe take a tolerance break for a few days. And they literally break into a cold sweat in front of me. And then they just backpedal as hard as they can because they don't want to take a tolerance break. Well, self-awareness can really take you far in this world, people. And if you are scrambling to make excuses as to why you can't take a tolerance break, but in the same breath you're insisting that this plant is non-addictive, those two things aren't really true at the same time. You know what I mean? It's not just because you don't want to take a tolerance break. It's because there's a mild dependency there. And just because you don't literally puke when you try to stop doesn't mean that you're not, even mildly addicted to something. So anyway, I'm going to get off that soapbox, but the point is, that's an example of a topic that might be debated still today, and it's a topic that'll be looked into by this new Cannabis Research Institute, part of the University of Illinois system. So that launched this week, and as Jason Brown of Illinois News Joint notes, they had a live-streamed Riverside chat. Governor J.B. Pritzker had some opening remarks there. They had a panelist of professionals discussing the announcement and the launch of the Cannabis Research Institute, and they all kind of talked about the importance of unbiased research relating to the topic of cannabis. So those are just kind of examples of what I mean when I also agree that we do need more unbiased research. Answering these questions definitively and by a consensus in the reality-based community, using evidence from experiments and from studies that can be recreated by anybody across the world who can arrive at the same conclusions. That's how we get to truth, and that's how we can move forward with collective and shared knowledge and agreed upon facts. So I'm really looking forward to what the Cannabis Research Institute finds out, and I will certainly have somebody from the Institute on the show in the near future to talk about what they're working on. Some other things that you can find, recent publications of IllinoisNewsJoint.com, grow journals. There have been a lot of different journeys by growers with different seeds. You can read about their sorts of, their highs and lows of those journeys. There's product reviews including Highwayman Live Resin by Dabstract, Special Sauce Vape Cart by Bloom, and Afternoon Delight Disposable Vape by Good News. All of those are there for you and more anytime you want. Any news or information about cannabis, products, events in or around Illinois, all at IllinoisNewsJoint.com. Now I'd like to get into my products of the week. These are cannabis products that I sample during the week, whether they're flower, beverages, edibles, concentrates, you name it. I will give it a try and kind of tell you my feelings about it. And I've also been doing these reviews in the weekly Chronic newsletter, which again, you can subscribe to for free. It's down in the description notes there. This week, I reviewed Sweet Buzz's Caramel Met Cookie, which is kind of their answer to a Twix. That is in the weekly Chronic. But as I mentioned there, I'm going to tell you about a beverage. It is one of these THC seltzers, and it's from the makers of Wynk, W-Y-N-K. I've talked a lot about their flavors. I love what they're doing. And I've been going through another branch of their beverages, Countdown. These are a little bit stronger. Wynk is available at like liquor stores. You'll find it at Binny's, sometimes bars as well, or grocery stores. I've seen them at produce markets and stuff around Chicago. Countdowns you're going to find at dispensaries. These are a little heavier, and they're marketed toward people with a bit higher of a tolerance. Wynk is like 2.5 or 5 milligrams. Countdown 10 milligrams of THC. And so I've really been enjoying the seltzers. They also have 100 milligrams of caffeine in them. So you get a nice little buzz from THC and you get a little energetic kick of caffeine. And this flavor of Countdown that I've been sipping on this week are the Berry Force Energy. versions of Countdown. I like these seltzers, as I said, because I enjoy caffeine. I have coffee in the mornings, and these Countdown seltzers kind of fit in well into my early afternoon window. Sometimes, for a while anyway, I would kind of typically have 2 cups of coffee during the day. I'll have one somewhere between 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. after my morning workout, after kind of meditating, taking a shower and all that, and maybe Violet is now finally down for a mid-morning nap. That's when I'll have my first cup of coffee and get some work done for the day, and then I'll have a second cup between 2 and 4 p.m., kind of just to help combat that early afternoon slump that sometimes settles in. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. These Countdown energy beverages, these have kind of taken the place of my second cup of coffee in that 2 to 4 p.m. window. Because of that 100 milligrams of caffeine, it gives me a nice boost, but you also kind of round it off with the THC. So I have found these to be wonderful. 0 grams of fat, cholesterol, no sodium. It does have 5 grams of added sugars per serving. And there are 2 servings in a can. So you're looking at 10 grams total and 40 total calories for each can of Countdown. It's not terrible, but it's also not ideal if you're looking to avoid added sugars entirely. So I have to say too, not wild about the flavor of Berry Force Energy. It brings kind of a LaCroix to mind for me, if you ever had those seltzers. A little bit smell and taste of berry. You do get that immediately, but it's pretty vague and empty. It's not a specific raspberry or blueberry. It's just a berry. And it sort of reminded me of some cereals that you may have had when you were younger, like Berry Kicks or Captain Crunch. It's a hollow sweetness. Not tart at all, just mildly sweet. So the taste does fade fairly quickly. It doesn't offend for very long, which I like. The caffeine kick and the end buzz of the THC make it a winner still for me. But this is not my favorite flavor. I will tell you about my favorite flavor of the Countdowns coming up very soon. But I gave this a 7 out of 10 for the flavor, and overall the Countdowns get a 9 out of 10 for the caffeine kick and the THC buzz afterward. So take that for what it's worth. Go find a Countdown at your local dispensary and tell me what you think. Text Cannabis Man at the link below in the description notes. But I've tried a much better product this week as well, and I want to tell you about these. I've talked a lot about Sweet Buzz because I really enjoy what they're doing. They're candy people who have moved into the cannabis space. They are veterans of that sweet space, so they know how to make a delicious treat, and now they're infusing them with delicious cannabis to the benefit of all of us. And I've been making my way through their Best in Grass winning multi-pack of sweet somethings. These are cups. Think of like peanut butter cups. They have what they call the peanut better cup, which is their version of like a typical peanut butter cup. They also have the cookie got creamed. As I mentioned, I reviewed the caramel met cookie. And the other cup that's in the multi-pack of theirs is the mint chill cups. And these I loved. I am a sucker for mint chocolate. When I was 12, just so you know, to give you an idea of where I'm coming from, when I was about 12 years old, I just about OD'd on York peppermint patties. And not literally OD'd, but I had too many of them, so I could not eat them again until my 20s. I went to my grandma's house and she would always have them. She would give me a pack because she knew how much I loved them. And one Christmas, I just took down the entire pack. And so that ruined the taste of those specifically for me. But I could still have other mint chocolate stuff, just not York peppermint patties, until my 20s. Then my fondness of that flavor did come back. The blast of minty cool breeze riding on the back of a sweet and delectable chocolate wave, that never really left me, the preference for it. And I found that this product, the mint chill cups from Sweet Buzz, hangs 10 with my tastes. Biting into the cup's chocolate shell is sweet and satisfying, and the edges almost crinkle or crumple in your mouth in a very unique and pleasing way. Then the minty fresh center takes over, and if you bite into it rather than just popping the whole thing in your mouth, either one is fine. But if you bite into it, you'll see there's like a milky white mint filling in the center of the cup. And it's sort of reminiscent texture-wise of Cadbury eggs, if you've ever had those. Very sweet, thick and creamy, but it's not overpowering. And the chocolate sort of comes along with it subtly. It elevates the chocolate rather than overpowers with it. It's more of a dance than an assault, and I appreciated that. The 10 milligrams of THC always bring the buzz afterward, and that sets you into a nice, wonderful evening. I had these as an after-meal treat after my dinner, and it sent me into the evenings just fine. I recommend this for anything, whether you're having a night at home with your significant other, maybe just throwing a movie or show on the TV, or maybe you're going out either for a concert or you're having dinner with friends or whatever. These Sweet Buzz treats are great for that. And the mint chill cups specifically, I think they fit in very well with the holiday time. As I said, York peppermint patties around Christmas, for me, it just kind of fits very well. I gave the taste of these a 10 out of 10. I think they're right up there with the peanut butter cups, which is another preference of mine. Either one of these are just top of the line infused cannabis sweets, and you owe it to yourself to try some of the Sweet Buzz Mint Chill cups, or their peanut butter cups, or hey, do yourself a favor, just get the Sweet Somethings multi-pack. That way you can try all of what they've got going on. But if you give them a try, I promise you won't regret it. And you can head to GetSweetBuzz.com to find the nearest place where you can get some of those. And speaking of dispensaries, the next time you're at a dispensary, make sure you have downloaded the High Rewards app. You may have heard me mention this on a previous episode. It is the only cannabis rewards app you'll ever need. That may be a new concept to you, cannabis and rewards going together. It is still kind of in this hodgepodge legalese place where some states have it, other states don't. Federally, it's in this wonky prohibited phase. Yet, in places like here, Illinois, it's like this, land of milk and honey, where it's within the state lines, it's totally legal, but if I cross over to Indiana or Wisconsin, they can slap the cuffs on me and just treat it like they always could when it was prohibited. Very strange. But either way, there is an app that'll give you rewards for your cannabis purchases. We're familiar with loyalty programs. If you go to whether any big retailer, if you're going to Target or Walmart, or even a Barnes & Noble, which are apparently coming back. So any one of these places, you sign up, you give your email. Every time you make a purchase, they track it, and they give you some kind of reward for it. If it's points, if it's a free meal, like let us entertain you, whatever it is, there's some kind of reward. Well, High Rewards rewards you for getting high. It's wonderful. You download the app on your Apple or Android smartphone, and you can do so if you haven't already. There's a link below in the description notes. You may notice a theme with that. I like to try and include links of what I'm talking about in the description notes. I'm a responsible podcaster. I'm not just, talking into the air here. I want you to actually follow along with me. And I also want to do you a favor, which is what I've done here. I've included the link to download High Rewards below. Click on it. You can download the app, put in your name, an email, set up a password, and allow it to access your location. And the reason you want to do that is because the next time you walk into a dispensary, before you've bought anything, you can check in to the High Rewards app. It'll geolocate you, determine that you're in a dispensary, and then it'll give you points just for being there. Then when you go up and talk with the bud tender, and they hand you your wonderful cannabis, scan your receipt into High Rewards, and you'll get a lot more points that way too. And those aren't the only way to get points. You can watch videos, take surveys, play mobile games, share it with your friends. All these are ways to get points which you can use at major retailers like Amazon, like Walmart, like Target, like these ones I was just talking about. You can get gift cards with your points and High Rewards. This is the world we're living in. Not only is cannabis legal, maybe it is where you are, maybe it's not. Maybe you're listening to me right now from a non-legal state, in which case, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for just bragging about how wonderful life is here. But you can download High Rewards too, and when you come visit Illinois or California or Michigan or any other state that has legalized cannabis, you go into a dispensary there, and you'll get points in your High Rewards app that are usable still anytime you want to convert into those gift cards for the major retailers. And if you download the app through the link below and you put in the promo code CANMAN, CANNMAN, like cannabis, CANMAN, you'll get $5 right away. No questions asked. You're welcome. You're welcome for the $5 and the recommendation to download High Rewards. You're already getting high. You might as well get highly rewarded too. And hey, before we get into this interview, I wanted to give you a heads up. We ran into some technical difficulties right in the middle. We lost our connection, and then Alex was able to connect again, but it was sort of a different sound. It actually gets a little bit cleaner, and you'll kind of notice a change slightly around 8 minutes in. But that's the only issue, and I just wanted to give you a heads up. Now, on to the interview. Listener, my guest today is going to have some great information for us regarding the efforts to unionize. You know, as legal cannabis is moving all throughout the country, different states are legalizing in different ways. And by that, I mean there is this patchwork of laws as we operate under the current legal framework federally, which is to say cannabis still being a Schedule I substance as we're recording this on October 7th. We're all waiting, hoping for news that it gets rescheduled down to Schedule III, but that administrative hearing is now set for December 2nd. Meanwhile, though, as the states are legalizing, dispensaries find themselves in different positions, just like any industry does, based on the companies that own and operate them. And the workers at many Illinois dispensaries have decided to unionize, and they've done so several times, and different chapters of these dispensaries, the ones that operate under different companies, they have decided of their own accord over the last few years since Illinois went recreationally legal back in 2020. A lot of dispensary workers have made the decision to go union. And most recently, the Evanston location of Zen Leaf, the cannabis retail chain, they voted overwhelmingly to join the International Brotherhood of the Teamsters Union. And so I thought, who better than someone from the union to talk a little about these efforts to unionize, why the workers want to do it, and what benefits the union can offer. And so please welcome business agent with the local 777 of the Teamsters Union, Alex Suarez. Welcome, Alex. Thanks for coming on today.
Hey, hi, how's it going? Anytime, no worries. Thank you for having me. I love, having the chance and the opportunity to speak on any scale about this kind of stuff. It's really some groundbreaking movement. Honestly, it's really sweeping the nation, to be completely honest. It's not just here in Chicago, it's everywhere.
Right. No, I love it. I think that there's really no, I'm in media, I do broadcasting here in Chicago, and so I do a lot of general news broadcasting and covering of different stories and whatnot. And for my money, there is no space that's more exciting right now than the cannabis space. And it's just, there's so much change happening. The attitudes of people are so fun, and it's unlike anything else that's out there right now. And so just tell us a little about yourself. How did you come to get involved with the Teamsters Union, and what's your sort of feelings about cannabis?
Hey, okay, yeah. So I have been working in the cannabis industry since 2020, I think, actually, yeah. So I've been in the industry for quite some time. That's where I started my whole journey, even with Teamsters. I started at a dispensary myself, and I was there from the very beginning. So it was first owned by a smaller owner, and then it was sold to a larger MSO. Then we saw the changes happen immediately. So then immediately chose to seek help from a union and kind of go from there. Well, I was there for the negotiation of the contract all the way up to being a steward for a couple of years. And that's kind of like the point of contact between the membership and both the company and the union.
Sure.
And then after a couple of years of being a steward, I was given the opportunity to come on and work, with Teamsters directly to not just help out my own dispensary, but to help out the rest of the dispensaries and as well as other industries here that the union represents.
That's so cool, and I love it, Alex, because I up until recently I was working for iHeartRadio. I was doing traffic for them, and we're a member of SAG-AFTRA, so I'm very familiar with union stuff. And I became a steward for the last 5-6 months while I was working there, and so I know exactly what you're talking about. That point person of the go-between between the workers and management, and sort of just getting communication out. It is oftentimes it can be kind of a thankless job, and you're basically kind of in a management role, and that can go differently depending on which shop you're in. But I'm curious, what sort of changes when you were working for the dispensary and they went from a smaller owner to an MSO? What were some of the changes you guys saw?
Oh, for sure. So we saw some, small changes from the uniform policy, which seems small, but it honestly does affect everybody. It affects the culture from inside the dispensary to everybody's general disposition, to greater changes as in pay. And that was kind of the biggest one, as well as they made the decision to no longer be able to accept tips. And that greatly affected everybody's paycheck in some serious ways. And not only did they want to take tips away, they also wanted to lower everybody's pay. So those are two really massive things, aside from, a smaller day-to-day, workflow things that as soon as we heard that did not sit right with us for many obvious reasons.
Yeah, totally understand that. Those are the biggest, take-home pay, changing the style of it, where you were able to accept tips, then not, and then just your overall compensation. I think anybody, whatever field you're working in, I think if that changes, that's kind of the bottom line. And if the company gives you no wiggle room on that front, I think anybody would kind of, stop what they're doing and take notice of that and want to kind of change it back to whatever it was. Because all of us at the end of the day here, it's a job's a job. You're trying to put food on the table, and it's this is why people do go union. And on that front, so where are we in terms of a dispensary store count that are unionized with the local 777 of the Teamsters here?
Yeah, I was just trying to do that math actually before I got on this phone call. But
take your time.
Right. No worries. I think we're right under 22 or right at 22.
Gotcha.
With this Zenleaf over in Rogers, with this Zenleaf over in Evanston, pardon me. And honestly, the Rogers Park and Zenleaf one in Evanston are so close, and they happen so close to each other and chronologically as well, that sometimes totally a little messed up.
Totally understandable. They are geographically, they're right by each other, and I did see in this article I'm reading here that Rogers Park unionized just before the Evanston location. So as you said, we're sitting around 22 right now that are with your chapter of the Teamsters, and you mentioned what it was that drove your shop to go union. Are you hearing similar things from these other shops that have decided to join your chapter?
What I'm seeing, what I'm noticing as a trend in the shops that are choosing to unionize is that, either they're coming from a smaller shop that just got taken over by a large company, and they're noticing the changes that this larger company is imposing right away and are not happy with it. Or they've been enchanted by a larger company, seeing the company culture from the outside. Then they go in and realize, there's a lack of accountability is what I'm hearing a lot, a lack of transparency, especially from upper management. So, a lot of the work processes and workflows get changed, and not to say that people are not adaptable. However, you don't want to experience discipline because of these changes, right? And that's something that we are seeing. And a way to keep people accountable and keep people transparent is through a CBA.
Yeah, sure. And that collective bargaining agreements, as you're talking about, that's one of the hallmarks of what unions do for different shops. Whatever business you're in, whatever industry, unions are a way for workers to collectively bargain and come to a negotiating table with management and hammer out an agreement that both sides, sign on the dotted line. And that is one of the many reasons why unions are so great for workers. It's because of these things that Alex is talking about right now. And with cannabis and this industry being in its infancy, as I talked about at the top, we're still in this place where every state is kind of like its own island regarding its cannabis laws. And so they all have different rules, different policies, and it's a hard way of doing business. It's also kind of hard on the workers. I mean, the Illinois workers, anybody in these dispensaries only has to worry about how this state is doing it. But the MSOs, the multi-state operators, they're operating differently in different states. And so that complication, that way of doing things can sometimes trickle down and really hurt the workers that are under their umbrella in these different states. And so that's why I think the work that you're doing at the Teamsters 777, Alex, is really, really important. What are some of the plans that you guys have going forward? What are some of the priorities, let's say, on your agenda for when shops first unionize? Obviously, everybody's got things that they're worried about in particular. But when a shop does join your chapter, what are some of the first steps that you guys take?
For sure. So there's always the transition period, and I think that is exactly that time. As soon as you unionize, what to expect right after. And the main thing is, and I think you touched on this just a bit now, it is such a new industry all over the country, and everybody has, every state has its own way of running things. But because it's so new, there's so many people on the other side, so we call it, on management side, that have never interacted with a union. Let's say they have never even heard of a union until they hear of us. And so when we try to do very normal union things, sometimes it's met with a little questioning, it's met with a little bit more hostility is not the right word, but it is met with a little bit more of a
resistance.
Yes, correct. That's the best word. Thank you. It's met with a bit of resistance, just simply because they're not aware, they're not around, or they're not used to what we're doing here. So something as easy as like access to the shop, you know what I mean? So that is something that the first thing that we kind of look to is talking to management, making sure, hey, we're on the same page. I'm not trying to fight with you personally. We have a CBA, or even before a CBA. While we're negotiating it, I always try to let it known to the management, we're probably going to have to interact beyond this. So let's just find a common ground where we're both educated on, and then go from there. And then beyond that, I definitely want to talk to the new members. Again, it's such a new industry. A lot of people haven't heard of unions until they hear of us, until they are in the workplace and they think, well, I need something better for myself. So one of the first things that I try to do is educate our members as well. And from what is a union to our history, all the way to the, very democratic processes that we hold, to, find the steward, get surveys out for a contract to make sure that we get what we need at this particular location, inoculating them on membership meetings, making sure that they know all of our resources that we have for them that are beyond their contract, such as like the scholarships that Teamsters provide and other, benefits.
Yeah, that's important stuff too. I mean, those are kind of benefits you don't really necessarily always think of when people do think of unions. It is about the CBAs a lot of the time. I think a lot of people picture the extreme examples of like picket lines or people needing to go on strike when negotiations break down. But you're, talking about the day-to-day here. You're talking about trying to reach a CBA that both sides, management and workers agree to. You're trying to protect workers' rights, trying to make sure they get fair pay for the work they're putting in, access to the shop, like you mentioned, but also things like that, like offering scholarships and different resources. Those are these other methods of support that unions can offer that you're totally right. I don't think a lot of people bring those to mind when they consider, what a union can offer them. And so, Alex, kind of while we're talking about this and the important stuff that you guys do offer, how can either members that are already with you in dispensaries reach out, or maybe dispensaries in Illinois who are thinking about unionizing? What's the best way for them to go about contacting you?
Wow. Hey, so I always, honestly, I do like to put out my personal contact information because, and I'm not afraid of answering a cold call. So I will put it out there. And I do think that kind of is the best way to reach us, because we're always on the go, and we're always going to a dispensary, we're organizing, I'm meeting with members. So if you catch me on the go, I'll come right to you. You know what I mean? So, you can call us directly to our cell phones. The office line is, somebody's always here, it's ready to take anything, any messages, and relay them to us immediately. We have a QR code as well, floating around with a specific link to Cannabis organization, and it's got a link tree with the benefits, who to contact, what is this organization? Like we said, it's such a new industry that there's a lot of people that don't even know who we are and why it's important. So, and some basic labor rights stuff, like your wine garden rights, and a little link to the NLRB.
And just in terms of that contact info and the QR code and the link tree that you mentioned, is there a website for the 777 people can get to, or is there a place online that they can find that stuff?
Definitely a website, absolutely. You can definitely reach us at teamsters777.org. And yeah, my email as well is alex@teamsters77.org. There is a cannabis specific website attached to the link tree. And oh gosh, it's escaping me at the moment. I do think it's cannabisteamsters.org.
Well, hey, I mean, it's easy enough to get there to teamsters777.org, and then, listener, you can find the link tree there. You can get right to the cannabis-specific page from that website of the union at large, but that sounds easy enough, and obviously, Alex just giving her contact info there, too, to send an email if you got any questions. But, yeah, I love what you guys are doing, Alex. I think this is, as you mentioned, this is a new industry, as we're talking about, like, unions in general, the different relationships, whatever industry you're in, between companies and between the workers can sometimes be just fraught with, discontent or disagreements. And it's not always like that. It certainly doesn't have to be like that. But sometimes both sides reach an impasse. And for my money, as I mentioned at the top of this interview, I'm a member of SAG-AFTRA. My wife has been a member of a union in the past. I think unions are some of the best things that workers can do for themselves, because, people sometimes think that they can negotiate on their own with a company, and sometimes that works out, but sometimes it doesn't. And then if you're not in a union, sometimes you're just out of luck when you reach that point. Whereas if you're a member of the local 777 of the Teamsters, for instance, you have the resources of that entire union at your back if and when something does go wrong with the company, or the negotiations you were in take a turn you weren't really expecting. I think it's often beneficial to have somebody fighting at your back like that.
Absolutely. There's something to be said about strength in numbers and solidarity between industries. At the end of the day, they can't make money without us. And it's important we show them that. Yeah,
it's huge. And especially, here in Illinois, I look back at, Labor Day, a holiday we all celebrate all the time, every single year. And that goes directly back to like the Pullman riots back in the 1800s. And that was one of the very first worker rebellions kind of against a company that was, doing things as crazy as you'd live in a company town, like the Pullman neighborhood. It was not just named that for nothing. Like the owner of that company had people, his workers, living there, and so not only was he totally in control of their wages, but also their living conditions and what the cost of living was in that area. And so to think back of that at that time, we're talking about 130, 140 years ago right now, and it might seem like forever to many of you listening and stuff, but you never really know what the future holds. You never know how far away from those kinds of things we are. And it is that history that's right here in Illinois that has to do with why this is such a strong union state. And I think it just makes sense that the cannabis industry that has launched here and all these MSOs who are headquartered here in Chicago, in the state of Illinois, and really got a 2-year head start operating while all these other licenses were held up in in lawsuits in court. That head start and the way those companies are operating now, the only antidote for it, the only real resistance workers can offer, and the only real power they have is, as you said, Alex, solidarity, and it's strength in numbers.
Most definitely. And I'm so happy you mentioned Chicago's history with unions, especially with the Haymarket. There's actually a dispensary not too far from that bridge, and it is represented by us. So if you guys are ever looking to buy some historic cannabis, right off of Western and Ogden is where you should go.
Western and Ogden. Good to know.
You're absolutely correct. There's so much rich union history in this town, and for MSOs to come in, I would almost say to them, expect a union contract within the first several years, because that's just the culture of the city, that people know what they're worth and they're willing to do something about it.
Let's keep that attitude going too, because, as Alex is talking about, like, the history's right here, the examples are plain right before us. Anybody whose family's from the area, our ancestors fought this fight right back then. We have this clear example in front of us. And, as she said, know your worth. Know your worth. Don't work for less than that. A job is a privilege, I suppose. All of us, it can be worse, and it's good to have a way to earn a living wage, but that never means that you should accept substandard conditions. You shouldn't work for less than you're, worth. You shouldn't deal with a company that's putting you through things that are not acceptable in today's day and age. And all of that can be remedied if you're feeling that right now, or if you're kind of, even just worried about the direction that the company that owns your shop is heading in. As Alex mentioned before, you can head to teamsters777.org, and you can get the contact info there and kind of explore this process of unionizing and everything else. Alex Suarez, business agent for the 777 Teamsters Union, thanks so much for stopping by today and just kind of giving us some perspective on what you guys do and what you can offer workers.
Hey, again, thanks for having me so much. This was a joy, and I love talking about what I do, to be honest. I'll talk about it for hours if I could.
That's great. Well, I'll certainly have you on again in the future, because I love talking about this stuff too, and it was nice talking to you.
Thank you. Yeah, looking forward to it.
And there you have it, listener. One more time, I'd love to thank my guest, Alex Suarez of the local 777 chapter of the Teamsters Union here in Illinois. You can see why it's so important, right, for workers, especially right now. We're really at this kind of inflection point here in the country. We've got these big, mega wealthy corporation owners. I'm talking about your Elon Musks, your Jeff Bezos. These guys, and make no mistake about it, they are trying hard to roll back worker protections. If they had their way, they would be paying wages that were below the poverty level, and there would be no workers' rights. If they could make us work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, they would do it. This is where unions come in. If you're not a part of a union, if you've never been in one, I am a member of SAG-AFTRA, for instance, and I can tell you that my experience with them, they have been there coming to bat for me, going against some of the companies I've been with a couple of times. Nobody ever wants to imagine, especially when you get a new job. For me anyway, when I get a new place of work, I walk in there, I want to meet people, and I want to roll up my sleeves and get to it. I'm not looking to cause any problems or to get anything that's undeserved to me. I want to make a name for myself, and I want to earn good money. But you spend a few years at a place, and you never know what the company's actually like until you're in there working for them. And sometimes they don't have your back. Sometimes things go wrong, and it's you against them. And if you're not union, if you're just kind of an independent worker, sure, maybe you can hire a lawyer and take the company to court if it comes to that. But that's all at your expense. That's all something that you're going to have to take on yourself. And by the way, that lawyer is working for you and is hired by you. But let's be honest, lawyers, they're not going to care about you one way or the other. They want to win. They want to win the case. But if it doesn't happen, it's not really the end of the world for them. A union is there as a representative of the workers. They exist to make our lives better and to protect us from these corporations. So you heard Alex and I just talking about how this is now bleeding into the cannabis space. And it was always going to come to this because these big multi-state operators are now giant corporations. And they're making billions of dollars even in this weird, half-prohibited status of cannabis in the country. What do you think it's going to be like when the doors open and it's fully decriminalized, or at least the federal government ends the prohibition and gets out of the way? These companies are going to be raking it in. And you better believe they have teams of lawyers. So I totally understand why these dispensaries are going union, and I applaud it. And if you have the opportunity to, it's not a decision to just enter into lightly. I'm not saying that, unions solve every single problem and that everything becomes perfect in your work environment the minute you join them. That's not what I'm saying. It is a decision that you should talk over with your colleagues, and it's something worth considering. And it may not end up being right for you for whatever reason. But I'm telling you, my experience with them has been a very positive one. And I'm very thankful to still be a member of SAG-AFTRA. And so if you work for dispensaries in Illinois and you have seen, or maybe you're just starting to get into the business and you're worried about seeing some of the things that Alex and I were talking about, contact the Teamsters. Go to their website, contact somebody from the 777, the Illinois chapter, talk with Alex. Just have a conversation. There's nothing wrong with that. And then you talk with your coworkers and colleagues and you see if it's right for you. But the thing that I really want to impress upon you here is that you are not alone. These unions are out there and they exist to help us as workers. So if you're getting kind of shafted by a new job, by a job you've been at for a while, if a new company took over your dispensary and you're not liking some of the things that you're seeing, contact a union and get to talking and see if it's right for you. And speaking of what's right for you and what's right for America, apparently what is not right for America, at least not right now, is Matt Gaetz, Florida congressman for Attorney General. If you listened to last week's episode, you heard me talk about him being the nominee by President-elect Trump to take over the Attorney General job. Matt Gaetz was Trump's pick to run the Justice Department. Well, as of today, November 21st, Matt Gaetz is withdrawing from consideration as Trump's Attorney General. He posted that to Twitter today on Thursday. He apparently met with senators on Capitol Hill on Wednesday, and I guess there was a vote taken. And according to CNN, in an article published earlier today, they said President-elect Trump called Gaetz this morning to tell him that he did not have the votes to be confirmed. Now, CNN says the source who told them this insisted that Trump did not ask Gaetz to drop out and allowed Gaetz, according to this article, to come to that conclusion himself, which, again, according to the source, he quickly did. So I've linked this article below, but the reason I'm bringing this up is because Gaetz, as the U.S. Cannabis Council stated, as I mentioned last week in the episode, Gaetz is looked at, think of him what you will, and he obviously had some ethics investigations, and, obviously this person is the cause of a lot of heated feelings on Capitol Hill, and he was investigated by the House Ethics Committee. And it had to do with, potential sexual relations with a minor when she was 17. So God knows I'm not a fan of that person for those things if they are to be true. Again, this is alleged because that ethics report was not released. We don't know the truth of it one way or the other. We don't know what they found. But regardless of that, Gaetz has been said to be the most pro-cannabis Republican on Capitol Hill. So I'll admit I was conflicted. Because on the one hand, I support the decriminalization of cannabis. And so if Matt Gaetz was going to be the best hope for doing that, I would have been sort of, reluctantly happy that he was in that position. Apparently, that was just not to be. And maybe that's for the best. But we now wait and see who the next Attorney General will be. And whoever next leads the Justice Department, it remains to be seen where they stand on the issue of cannabis and how likely it will be that this rescheduling momentum will move forward and that maybe it will be decriminalized altogether. But that is some big news from just today that Matt Gaetz no longer to be President-elect Trump's pick for Attorney General. Some other news from today. This was published this morning by Axios Chicago and by a friend and former colleague of mine, Justin Kaufman, who now works for Axios. The headline reads, proposed city ordinance takes aim at unregulated THC sales. This article from Axios Chicago is proposing that the city is looking to basically ban hemp products. Now, I've talked about this issue of hemp on the show a lot. Beverage makers, like the people who make Wink, they are in the business of hemp-derived beverages. That's where the THC that they get comes from. California, of all states, Gavin Newsom is considering a ban, and I know that's working its way through the legal system there. An Illinois representative brought to the House of Representatives, brought to the floor, an amendment that would have banned hemp products across the country. So the point is, this is an issue that right now lawmakers are looking into. And it looks like rather than wait for the state of Illinois to do it itself, Chicago is potentially considering regulating the sale of hemp products like Delta 8 joints, baked goods, and drinks sold outside of dispensaries. This is from a newly proposed city ordinance from Alderman William Hall of the 6th Ward. He proposed an ordinance to regulate the sale of hemp products in Chicago through licensing, age verification, and compliance measures for hemp businesses. It would also tax the products. Now, as Justin points out in his article, yes, but it doesn't regulate the product itself, which is what some lawmakers and the cannabis industry are pushing for. Hall put out a statement on the ordinance saying, quote, "This ordinance will make Chicago a leader in hemp regulation, protecting public health, supporting our communities, and creating a fair business environment," end quote. And some of the context that Justin gives, and as I've talked about on this show, hemp and cannabis are different types of cannabis. Both have the active ingredient THC, the compound that gets users high. But hemp has much less THC than cannabis, or as Justin says, marijuana. The 2018 Farm Bill is really the crux of this, and that again comes up on this show all the time. That Farm Bill, which they extended through this year, and they're going to take another look at next year when the new administration moves in, that 2018 Farm Bill effectively legalized hemp across the country through a loophole. And that loophole is that as long as the THC is under 0.3% in the product, that makes it hemp. And that makes it legal. If it's above 0.3% THC, that's cannabis. And that falls into the regulated processing of cannabis. Must be sold in dispensaries, has to be up to snuff on various standards, all of that red tape that comes with regulating cannabis. But if it's hemp, it doesn't have to deal with any of that. All those obstacles just fall away. And it's basically legal countrywide, again, if it falls under that 0.3%. So as Justin points out in the State of Play portion of his article, hemp-derived THC businesses selling unregulated products at shops across the state have become a thorn in the side of the regulated cannabis industry. That includes Delta 8 marijuana and THC seltzers sold in liquor stores. As Justin notes, these products have been outlawed in some Illinois towns, like Waukegan and Rolling Meadows. And last spring, the Illinois General Assembly came close to passing a law banning hemp-derived products. But the deal fell through at the end of the session, which I covered here on the Cannabis Man podcast. One reason the bill stalled was that craft brewers are creating hemp-derived THC drinks to offset the loss of revenue due to a sharp decline in beer sales. And that's just a reality I've talked about on the show as well. Whether it's hemp or whether it's cannabis, when people are consuming THC, they're not drinking as much alcohol. That's just a reality that has been shown in study after study. In states that legalize, or if they have hemp products, people are drinking less. So I get it. And I'll tell you what, I had an interview with somebody from the Boston Beer Company. You may have heard of Sam Adams. You may have heard of Truly or Twisted Tea. They are getting into the cannabis space. And so, as Paul Armentano of Normal also told me, he believes that, as much as I feel like big alcohol and maybe big pharma are anti-legalizing cannabis, Paul insists that they're going to partner with cannabis companies, and they'll likely release products just like that. But either way, these alcohol companies, these brewers, are looking to make up lost ground. Now, as Justin points out, the Cannabis Business Association of Illinois put out a statement responding to this effort. Quote, "While we appreciate efforts to rein in this gray market, we are concerned the proposal put forth by Alderman Hall would legitimize dangerous products in exchange for a quick cash grab by the city." The statement goes on, "There is a way to do this correctly. We do not have to sacrifice consumer safety for revenue generation. Justin notes that Hall leads the mayor's budget subcommittee charged with exploring new revenue sources as the city is grappling with a budget crisis. And Justin doesn't specify, but I'll tell you, as somebody who's plugged into Chicago here, the budget shortfall that they're looking at is over $1 billion. With a B. And so it is a major issue. It is a crisis, and they are looking at everything to find new revenue. But I do think that's a fair assessment from the Cannabis Business Association, the CBAI, a cash grab by the city if they end up legitimizing dangerous products. And hey, I'm not saying that all these hemp beverages and all Delta-8 products are bad, but I do say that there's no question there are bad actors in the space. Why wouldn't there be? I have covered articles on this show about people who are deliberately making cannabis products with packaging that is exactly meant to mimic popular candies and sweets. Things like, Oreos and Reese's and Jolly Ranchers and stuff like that. They are actively making packages and making names for the products that are so close to those that if you're walking through a store and see them on the shelves, you might not know the difference. So when people run around talking about, oh God, they're targeting kids, that's kind of what they're talking about. If you don't make a clear and obvious distinction between cannabis products and the regular old Jolly Ranchers, the non-infused, safe for kids to consume products, that's irresponsible. And that is something that does need to be addressed with this current state of affairs regarding the hemp industry. So Chicago is looking to do something about this, and whether it is just a revenue grab or it's sort of a responsible effort to address this gray market of the, recently legalized through the Farm Bill hemp products that are out there, there's no question that something does need to be done about this. And it'll be interesting to see kind of where this lands. One final story that I wanted to share with you before I let you go this week, listener. This has to do with the rescheduling effort, and I mentioned it earlier in the episode. The DEA had this administrative hearing, which after the public comment period this summer was set for December 2nd. That hearing is still going to happen, but the judge has asked for more information about witnesses, and now the actual ruling is going to be pushed back to either January or February of next year. So we're looking at 2025 for any movement on rescheduling. But the story, and this is from Marijuana Moment, I love their work that they do. This was published earlier this week by Kyle Yeager, and the headline reads, DEA should be removed from marijuana rescheduling hearing after illegally conspiring with prohibitionists, legal filing says. So this is referencing a new legal filing. And a DEA judge is being asked to remove the agency from its role in an upcoming hearing on the Biden administration's marijuana scheduling proposal, and the filing cited alleged statutory violations that include unlawful communication with a prohibitionist group. Kyle goes on here, when the Department of Justice formally proposed moving cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 under the CSA, consistent with a recommendation from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, one aspect stood out, Kyle notes. The DEA administrator did not sign the notice of proposed rulemaking. I talked about that on this show. She, Ann Milgram, that is the administrator, she broke with historical precedent on federal scheduling proceedings. Instead, it was signed by Attorney General Merrick Garland. That was one of several factors that led to a motion being filed with DEA Administrative Law Judge John Mulrooney this week, Monday, seeking corrective action. It was submitted on behalf of Hemp for Victory and Village Farms International, which were both invited to take part in the rescheduling hearing set to begin next month. That would be the 2nd of December. The issue, Kyle notes, isn't just that DEA Administrator Ann Milgram declined to sign the proposed rule. Throughout that notice, the agency said it needed additional data on a variety of issues, namely cannabis-related health issues and law enforcement concerns, in order to make a complete assessment. The motion argues that the backwards approach to the rulemaking violates federal statute. Hey, before I go on, thank you, Hemp for Victory and Village Farms International, for filing this, because I don't know if this is your first time listening, listener. I don't know if you've heard any other episodes before this, but if you've been listening to me this whole year, This is going to sound familiar to you because I've been banging this freaking drum all of this year. I've said it time and time again to the point where I can barely listen to myself repeat it anymore. But the DEA was never going to, speedwalk this. Not only were they not going to speedwalk it, they were going to try and throw up roadblocks every chance they got because this goes against their own self-interest. And that's something that, Paul Armentano, again, I keep bringing him up because he has been in this fight for over 3 decades. He said to me on this very show that it's unquestionable that the biggest opponent to legalizing cannabis, it's not big alcohol, it's not big pharma, it's not tobacco, it is law enforcement. And the DEA is at the top of that list. They are the big shadowy villain in this story. They are the ones who do not want cannabis to be rescheduled and certainly not decriminalized. Why? Because it gets between them and their bacon. It takes money out of their pocket. It takes authority from their existence. They do not want this to be done. And it is nice to see a legal filing where somebody is finally making this case. Hey, this group over here who is deciding on whether or not this gets rescheduled, they are not a neutral and unbiased party in this debate. They have a very vested interest in keeping the status quo unchanged. Anyway, Kyle goes into a lot more detail in the article. I have linked it below. I always encourage you to read it for yourself, find out more information and context here because this is important stuff. And I gotta say, I'm not holding my breath for this to actually change anything. I don't think that this lawsuit is going to remove the DEA from this process. They're always going to be a part of it. But I still believe the momentum is there. And President-elect Trump did pledge during the campaign to move cannabis legalization forward. He did pledge to push the reform agenda further. And so far anyway, I'm just going to keep my fingers crossed and hope that he stays true to his word and that we do that. But I'm not expecting the DEA to be taken off of this process. I do expect them to be a part of this whole thing. But it is nice to see somebody going into court and raising their hand and saying what I've been saying all year, that this group really should not be a part of this rescheduling effort, because they are trying to keep it from happening. Anyway, that's all I'm going to read from the article. There's a lot of more great context in there from Kyle Yeager, and I've linked it below like I always do. You should subscribe and support Marijuana Moment however you can. But this seems like a perfect opportunity for me to do something that I just started doing on last week's episode, which is get into my haiku. And this is a part of the show where I take a haiku that I have written relating to not necessarily cannabis, but anything just sort of peaceful. If you're unfamiliar with a haiku, it's basically a specific poem with the rules that's 3 lines. The first line is 5 syllables, the second is 7, and the third is 5 again. And I just thought, hey, why not get high and try and write some of these? And so I decided to start bringing them onto these episodes. And I thought it would be sort of a perfect opportunity to just kind of relax, take a little bit of a hit of cannabis and a deep breath and just calm down after getting all riled up about these news stories that I talk about here on the Cannabis Man podcast. I thought the haiku would be a nice way to kind of end these episodes and just get us all on a nice wavelength to continue on throughout our days. So whenever you're listening to this, wherever you are, I hope things are going well. But here in Chicago, this morning, my wife Gretchen and I took our daughter Violet out in the stroller, and we were walking. It was about 8 o'clock this morning, and there was snow falling on the city. It was the first sort of, snowfall, and they said it was going to turn to rain by midday, but by 3-4 o'clock this afternoon, it was totally covered in white. The ground was all, had a blanket of snow on it. I'm sure by Sunday it'll be just rain because I know the temperature is going to go up, but it made me think about the transition from fall to winter, and that is the topic of today's haiku. So let's get into it.
golden leaves drift down. Cold whispers replace warm winds. Earth pulls on her coat. And that is today's haiku.
Hope that made you feel a little better. It does definitely help take the edge off a little bit for me. Nice deep breath, little meditative bed there, and of course, a wonderful bong hit of delicious cannabis. I hope you're able to enjoy that as well. If you like the haiku, let me know. Send a text at the link down below. You'll see a line that says text Cannabis Man, which you can do anytime. Love to hear from you. If you have anything to say about my guest interview with Alex Suarez or have any questions about how to get in touch with your local union, let me know. Any topics that I covered, if you have an opinion about a potential hemp ban, if you got something to say about the DEA and rescheduling or Matt Gaetz as the Attorney General no longer, do me a favor and let me know. You can either do that. You can follow the show at C-Man Podcast on Instagram or Twitter. Also Blue Sky now. I have definitely joined that. That's a fun place, not as dark and dreary as some other social media platforms. It's also the Cannabis Man Podcast Facebook page and YouTube channels. And as I said, you can subscribe to the Weekly Chronic. If you like what I'm doing here, get a newsletter in your email inbox every Tuesday morning with more cannabis-related news stories, other product reviews, and some of my perspective about this ever-changing landscape of legal cannabis, this new green frontier that all of us are exploring all the time, every single day. Do be sure to call those you love. I know it's holiday time, and I know it's difficult for many of us. We've all lost people. We all think about those that we miss around this time of the year, but there are still people around that care about you and that you value the connections with. And I promise you'll regret it if you don't take advantage of those opportunities to reach out to them, which are more prevalent around the holidays. I know you'll regret it once that opportunity takes itself off the table. So talk to those you love, give them a hug, tell them how you feel, and ideally, enjoy some great cannabis with them and just kind of take a walk through this beautiful world, because it is that. Life is strange, but it's wonderful. And it's even better when you enjoy it with those you care about. So thanks again for listening, and we'll talk more next week on the Cannabis Man Podcast. Bye-bye. Cannabis Man is 100% originally crafted by myself, Don Kleppen. Original theme music written and composed by Yusu Kim, aka Good Son.